afternoon, everyone. I'm Councillor Martin Fowler, Chair of the Committee, and welcome to the second meeting ever of the Environment and Sustainability Policy Committee. I hope you've all had access to the papers, which are on the Council's websites. We'll start with some welcomes. So, welcome to the public, the press, and those attending the meeting, and the officers. Thank you for supporting us. We'll go around and introduce the councillors.
Hello, I'm Abby Finch, Councillor for St George Central.
Hello, I'm James Crawford, I'm Councillor for Mitchelson and Ashley Down.
Hiya, I'm Izzy Russell, Councillor for Ashley.
I'm Henry Michelle, Councillor for St Bishop.
Hi, I'm Tim Kent, Councillor for Hengrave and Whitchurch Park.
Everyone, Councillor Kydog, Councillor for Southmead. I was just going to come in on a point of order, Martin, actually. Just wondered, is the meeting being filmed now? Officially being filmed by us? Can I just raise a point about that? Because for 7 years I was in the Cabinet, every decision we made was filmed, recorded in public. So I think I let it slide at the last meeting because I don't know what was going on, if there was some technical difficulties or whatever, but what I've heard is that none of the policy committees are being filmed, or I think it's only one, and I don't know where you stood on the referendum to go to a committee system or not, but the argument made was that it would be more transparent than the mayoral system, and then we've come to these policy committees and, well, thankfully they're being filmed by a member of the public, but that's not acceptable really. It needs to be done officially. And as I said, being in that system for 7 years where everything we did was in public, I just find it unacceptable really. I don't know what your view is or what you were doing as the chair or what other chairs are doing to rectify it, but I think that needs to be put right pretty quickly.
Thank you, Kai, and I totally agree. I would like this to be webcast. The facilities are in the room, but it hasn't been provided for most of the policy committees, other than strategy and resources, and I'm disappointed with that. I'd like there to have been a record of our last meeting, not just the minutes, but the actual recording. It should be webcast and it should then be available. We need to find out when that will take place. I believe it's meant to happen, but it certainly hasn't happened yet, and I agree, that's disappointing.
Hello, I'm Kirsty Tate, Councillor for Hartlepool and Woodwood Ward. Good afternoon, I'm Councillor King. I am Councillor for Hillfields and the Vice Chair for the Environment and Sustainability Committee.
Let's hear what the information is back from.
Hello, I'm Bronwyn Faulkner. I'm a Policy Committee Officer supporting this meeting. Just to jump in slightly with the resources, you're absolutely right. The intention when the committee working group was looking at how policy committees would work was the intention to be transparent, to be filmed. Unfortunately, it's a resourcing issue, so we've had to prioritise just filming strategy and resources for the time being. I understand that there is plans to review that in the future. I'm afraid I don't have more details than that at the moment.
We will follow that.
Because I thought it was like some sort of technical issue, but someone's made the decision that there's other more important things to do, and I think that's wrong. And I think the people who campaign for the committee system should be up in arms really. And I know some of them are in the administration now, so I think it's something that needs to be rectified quickly.
No, I totally agree. We've raised it elsewhere, and I'll raise it again. Do you have any information?
No. Yes, I'm John Smith, Executive Director for Growth and Regeneration. No, I'm not sat on that discussion.
I will be looking for that.
No problem.
Okay, hopefully we'll have a response before the next meeting. Thank you for that. So I have to mention the emergency evacuation procedure. We're not expecting an alarm, so in the event of an alarm sounding, please leave the room quietly and calmly, be it the lobby area, out the main front door of the City Hall, turn right down the ramp towards the Cathedral, and we assemble in front of there. Hopefully that won't happen. But that's the procedure. Okay. So agenda item 2 is whether any apologies or substitutions, but everyone is present, so there are no apologies and no substitutions. I'll vote for it. Agenda item 3 is whether there are any declarations of interest by any committee members for any items on the agenda. Does anyone have any? No, nothing to record on that. Great, thank you. So item 4 is the minutes of the last meeting. So we've had published the minutes of the meeting. I do have a question about it, which is to get confirmation that the matters arising and the matters raised by members of the public in supplement to their questions and answers, whether those have been followed up and whether they've been received a response from the council.
I said that I'm signing off, so I think one of the Democratic Services officers contacted one of the attendees who had raised questions and hopefully resolved that. There was a question related to South Bristol Cemetery, yew tree farm and nesting and the impact on birds' nests, so there has been a report carried out into that, Chair, and that will be, the report of that will be attached to the report going to the Public Health Committee on the 11th of October. So it will be published there.
Okay, so that will be made public. Okay, thank you. So do others agree this is the correct record and we can propose anyone have to second the minutes so we can put this away?
Second then.
Thanks very much. Okay, so they've been confirmed as a record, so they can sign them later. Okay. Shares announcements would be the next item. I don't have any specific announcements to make, so we can move on. And then we come to the public forum, which is where we have a number of people attending. We have 3 questions and then 6 statements. So some of these are for people here. So the first question is from Freya Cunningham. So you're present, are you? Yeah, thank you for coming and for taking the question. You've had a written reply. Do you have a supplementary question to follow up that written reply?
Yes, I have 2.
Okay. Go ahead.
Thank you. As councils across the country have made positive steps to promote plant-based eating as a response to the climate and ecological crises, Bristol City Council has failed to keep step. With the Green Party now in administration, a party which acknowledges the importance of plant-based eating at its own conferences and events, this is particularly galling. Despite years of requests from members of the public to see this issue pursued seriously, Bristol remains notably absent from the list of councils that have made serious steps towards supporting the transition to a plant-based food system. My question is, what steps will the council make to ensure that this issue is not ignored? Can this committee commit to clearly identifying what catering the council does control and recommending this catering transition to fully plant-based so the Bristol City councillors are leading by example on this important issue whenever they attend the council meetings? Thank you.
Right, thanks very much. Thanks for that. You'll see in the written reply that we have asked officers to review the Plant-Based Council's own commitments and your suggestions and guidance, and I do look forward to seeing that reported back to us, and we'll have a look at that and see what the next step should be, and the Vice Chair and myself, I hope, will get that initially, and we'll decide to take that further. But just to be clear, there is very little catering provided by the council. Council meetings used to have catering, that was cancelled. They used to have biscuits, that was cancelled. There is very little available. But we should look at catering. And in fact, yesterday I asked about a contract that is in the process of going through, and that contract will be reviewing what is available to be served in this city hall. Some events are private events, how they arrange their catering is up to them, but the ones where they're council events, I want to have a look at what the contract says and how we can actually improve the plant-based menus in that. So I hope that's helpful. That's going through in the next 12 months or so, that new revised contract.
Great, thank you very much. Do I do follow-up questions now? Or?
Well, that was a supplementary question because you've had a written reply already. Did you have a second question?
That was the question I submitted, yeah.
Yeah. So, what would be your supplementary question after that?
I think you've covered most of it. It was about, your internal catering for meetings. Yeah. So would it be possible to get a timeline on any of the changes mentioned in your response?
Yeah, I'm not sure how long it will take to get the report from officers. I think we have to give them time to go through your own kind of requests and guidance. I don't know how long that might take because we have to schedule that. But in terms of the contract, it is going through a number of stages over the next sort of 9 months or to 12 months approximately. So it may take a while and depends what we can get into it at the appropriate stages. So we have to wait till the current contract is replaced.
Thank you very much.
Okay. We'll keep you informed for that. Okay. Thanks. Second question is from Councillor Townsend, who I don't believe has attended, has she? And so is the third question. Is that right? So she's had written replies. I know she's seen those. So those we know that she's received those. Okay. So we're on to public forum statements. So we do have a statement from James Jones. So again, we have received those, but my encouragement is make the main points to us as committee that you want us to know, and please do continue now.
Okay. The Earth food system that can ecologically sustain 8 billion people is one based on a plant-based diet. This is neither speculation nor newly published information, it is a fact that has existed even before this council declared a climate emergency in 2018, 6 years ago. I read the news, I see the ecological destruction, and I see Bristol Council so unwilling to make the minutest of changes to their internal catering. And I'm just stood here thinking this is so hopeless. Am I living in a twilight zone? This council is in a position to implement a change that could see a brighter future for our children, our young friends and family, for the planet. And yet here we are again, begging for the council to take action. I first spoke to the council on this topic in 2020, 4 years ago. What's happened in the span of 4 years? Well, myself and other residents have been routinely ignored, had meetings arranged with cabinet members who've no-showed, been given responses that have absolutely zero connection to our questions. Maybe the council will listen after the pandemic. Maybe the council will listen after the mayor is gone. Maybe the council will listen after the committee restructure. Maybe the council will listen now we've got so many green councillors. What more will it take before Bristol takes initiative and sets an example? Earlier this month, Nottingham Council voted to implement this change. As a resident living in a green city, I'm embarrassed to stand here today again. Please work with us. We're asking for something that can be implemented so easily.
Thanks very much for your statement. I hope you'll know that we did discuss that we're looking into the contract, so I hope there will be progress on that. Thank you very much. The second statement is from Jeff and Myra Farmer. Thank you. You're not. Okay, so we noted those. The third statement is from Ian Froggatt, the South West Regional Director of the Woodland Trust. Okay, we note that's in support of one of the items on the agenda. Fourth one, we do have Mark C.D. Ashdown from Bristol Tree Forum. You know the procedure, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. You've hopefully read our statement and seen the detail there, won't repeat it. I suppose our concerns about the reality or the realistic projection of tree canopy, but in particular we're concerned about to have strategy that relates to the protection of existing trees. And of course we know this is the one city plan. I'm never quite sure the status of what the one city plans are, is as far as planning policy is concerned, I think zero. So it concerns us that this hasn't been integrated into the local plan, or we've no proposals to do so. And I encourage the committee to think about that and consider how that might be done in such a way that what we aspire to in this strategy turns into actual action on a planning level at the very least. I know that's just one aspect of preserving trees in the city.
very much, Mark, and we will take note of that, and we'll come to that item shortly on the agenda. The next thing is from Savita Wilmot from the Natural History Consortium. I can see she's not here. And finally, Alex Stone of the Forest Vagrant Trust, not here either, but we thank them for their statements, which have been noted. Thanks a lot. So, the next item, which is, get that out of the way. We're now coming to one of the five main items on the agenda. It's the Bristol One City Climate Action and Investment Plan. At the last meeting of this committee, we were briefed about this project so that it could continue to its conclusion, and today we're hearing about the completion of the Action and Investment Plan. And it's also a document that's been supported by the Bristol One City Environment Board. So I think it's a really important document which catalogues just how many things we know we need to do before 2030 as a climate neutral city by that date. Would you like to introduce the report, Alex?
Thank you. So I'm Sensitive Climate Change Manager. So we brought this report, this proposal to the July committee and asked the committee if it wants us to develop the proposals further and bring them back to this committee, which we've now done. And what this document seeks to do is set out in quite some detail the actions that are needed to decarbonise the city, and those are set out in an action plan, and what kind of investment would be needed to achieve that, and they're set out in the investment plan. And it's been developed as part of our work with the European Union, an initiative called the Climate Neutral Smart Cities Mission, which is seeking to accelerate the decarbonisation of European and associated cities from around the continent. And what this document really seeks to do is give us the platform for further development of the areas of action that have been identified in it. And each of those will need significant further work to turn them into much more investable, actionable portfolios of projects. But what it does is it helps us understand what that need is. Is it possible to get the slides that we're including in the pack? Thank you, Chair.
Oh, no, sorry, not those ones.
Yeah, I won't do that one.
While we're waiting for the slides, hopefully they will be projected. Just to thank Alex and his colleagues for all the work on this. And we did agree in the last meeting that there would be a briefing for members of the committee. Glad to say most members were able to attend that. So we've had a lot more information, but I think it's important we hopefully do hear the main points that are in the report and that we're receiving today.
Okay. Would you take that? Apologies then. Make sure you help me. If members could turn to page 25 of the full agenda pack, then I can talk to them. They include perhaps while you're doing that, I can just talk through. There we go. Excellent. They'll be a little bit small on screen, but I can describe them as well. So this is really about trying to develop the existing One City climate strategy in order to accelerate decarbonisation of the city. And the reason we're doing it as the One City approach is that the City Council alone cannot decarbonise the city. It's working very hard on reducing its own emissions, but they account for less than 1% of the city's direct emissions. It's very important that we bring a wide range of partners into that activity. And hence the development of the One City climate strategy in 2020, and this action plan, investment plan, sitting directly under those to achieve its objectives. If we just move down to the graph, this is the trend of emissions in the city that we've seen to date from the first instance of local data. When we spoke at the July committee, there was a request for some of this context. And so you can see there that the emissions in the city have reduced by about 50% over that 15 or so year period. And that's a little bit ahead of the national averages and the other major cities in the UK. But clearly there's another 50% to do. And so that's the sectors that we've been looking at in planning the decarbonisation of the city. And when we were thinking, if we go down a little bit further, when we think about how do you change the rate of progress in the city, it's very much about changing the conditions that exist that allow climate action to come forward, and we call those the enabling conditions. And that little diagram that looks a bit like a flower describes the enabling conditions, which I will read out because they're not very clear on the screen. So they are about data and understanding the emissions, they're about funding and investment in the city, they're about national action, and we spoke last time at committee about the crucial need for significant national action to achieve the UK's statutory targets, which are not as ambitious as the local goals, and also the fact that some of that national action over the previous governments have not been at the scale and pace needed to achieve those national targets. We also then talked about the importance of skills, one of the areas of skills, because a lot of these measures will be implemented by skilled tradespeople and others. The importance of public engagement and participation and consent are crucial, and a whole new set of infrastructure is going to be needed, from district heating to electricity grid reinforcements. And so in order to achieve some of that, we recognise that one of the European colleagues at the European Union have been thinking in similar lines, and that's where the EU mission has come from. And that's very much focused on how do you tackle that funding element, how can you bring more investment into cities to enable their decarbonisation. And that's really what this proposal is all about. So Joe, if we can go back up to the top right diagram. And so we talked about the One City approach and the importance of partners. And some of the key partners are in the One City approach, but there are a number that are not, because they're maybe part of bigger regional or indeed national enterprises that are crucial to decarbonising the city. So we're looking at those emissions and the kind of key, we made a list of key stakeholders, and that diagram shows, the logos shows the organisations that are part of that transition team. We call it the transition team, sort of drawing on the language of the EU, how we manage that transition. And through that group, we've been able to develop the action plans and the investment plan that we're seeing. And it forms part of a suite of documents now, if we just scroll down to the next one, which says, you know, we went through an inventory, looking at those emissions, picking up data piece, taking the aspirations of climate strategy, and we formed what is called a climate city contract. And what we're being asked to do is today is authorise that contract. And the word contract is slightly nervous-making because it sounds like a very legally binding thing. It's not. It's essentially a commitment that we're making to work with the European Commission and other partners will join us in that, to say we will help to work to these three things. There's a commitments document that describes what we're essentially what we're setting out in broad terms, and then a more detailed action plan and investment plan. And the next diagram with the big arrow on it shows the steps and process that we've been through. I'm afraid it's too small to see in detail really, but just to reassure the committee that with that transition team we've been through a detailed process of working out these actions. We haven't just sat in the basement of City Hall and dreamt them all up. So, and from that we're able to generate the two main documents, the action investment plan, which sets out a sort of analysis of where we currently are, barriers are, and what the opportunities will be, and then how we might go about structuring the finance to enable that. And so the final slides show a sort of bit of that structure, just reiterating this from a strategy to the contract to a series of other interventions that we're making. This planning piece is just one part of that, the whole package in our wider programme. And the final slide is identifying in red the bits that we're agreeing today, hopefully the committee's being asked to agree today, and then the other things that we're doing that around it that complement it. And I can answer any questions that you might have about those, but just to reassure you, this isn't just a planning exercise. There are a series of actual projects that are happening around this to support the delivery of it. I'll stop there. But hopefully the paper is otherwise quite clear. I can run through the recommendations if that's helpful. Or do you?
Okay, well, just at this point, firstly, I'd like to say how impressed I am with all the work and the fact that you brought the partners together from across the city, key organisations who can make a practical difference, and working with them and the support I know you've had from people like Arabs to actually come up with realistic numbers as to what needs to be done in the city. I think that's really important. Those three bits of the commitment of what which is officially called a contract of what we're talking about today. Are there any questions or clarifications needed by any of the members of the committee at this stage? Councillor Kent.
Thanks. Number one, it's a very comprehensive report, so thank you very much for that, Alex. Just a couple of questions, because you'll know last time we had a debate around targets and goals. Very pleased to see you've adopted the term target in your report, referring to 2030 rather than goal. If you notice, you've done that in a few places, but that's good to see. So at the moment, the report's quite honest that based on current policy, we'd be a long way off hitting our 2030 goal, stroke target. But with these interventions, we get a lot closer, but we will still be roughly 12% of emissions from not hitting it. What other realistic policies are there that we could bring in to try to make sure that we get a lot closer to hitting our goal of zero emissions by 2030? Or at this stage, would any of those be just totally unrealistic?
So we've included all the things that we've been able to identify over the project period. I don't think we have got any more viable propositions to add to that at this stage.
Okay, thanks. So we have a target of a national target of 68% reduction in emissions by 2030. Based on what we can do locally, I know this is a difficult question, this one, what are the chances that we will be able to meet that in the sense as a minimum target? That's the national UK target that they've agreed to. What are the chances of us being able to meet that target without major government investment? Because obviously that's something which is out of our hands.
Yeah. So it's quite tricky to compare those two targets because they include different scopes of emissions and its baseline to 1990, the original one. We don't have data going back that far. But if you can make some approximations, and so I think without significant government investment in this area, we will not be able to achieve that level of reduction.
Okay, thanks. And then just one final question, if you please, Chair. I believe that when we declared the climate emergency in 2018, we also set an additional target as a council, and that was to try to hit that by 2025. That's only a year away, as it were. What's the gap, as in how close have we got to that goal, and what else can we do to try to achieve it?
Yes, so that target was really set as a way of trying to accelerate the rate of improvement that we've seen over the previous years, and it did do just that. It was double the rate of reduction measures, a reduction in emissions that the city councils, estate, vehicles, street lighting, things like that are in our control, which they were reduced. So it really did accelerate that change. A lot of the next phase is working through the City Leap. And of course, City Leap came on stream a year or two later because of the delays during the pandemic and the procurement process. So that, I think, has delayed a little bit of that what would have been the trajectory. We were not those days, so next to colleagues who say further on that. But I think if we can forecast what's in the pipeline, the Council's programme of decarbonisation is now Cabinet before the election last year approved £11 million of investment this financial year and next financial year, and that's going to take us a long way to decarbonising the corporate estate, very much focused on the major emitters. And there is other activity going around the fleet decarbonisation and replacing some of our petrol and diesel vehicles with electric vehicles, and on this having associated charging infrastructure, which is also slightly more complicated with our fleet not necessarily being depot-based and being based off people's homes who may or may not have access to off-road parking, etc. So there's some work going on to help accelerate that, as well as the work that David will speak about later in terms of how we use green gas as an interim measure to help us bridge that gap as we reduce the emissions of our estate. So we've reduced emissions now by 60% from baseline. I think it would be dangerous to put a number on the exact emissions it will be in 2025. The other thing I haven't mentioned is the street lighting programme. Nice of you know the street lighting programme was happening at pace. So I think that's another sort of £12 million or so that's been invested in that. And so there's been huge amounts of investment by the council over the previous administration in order to bring forward that decarbonisation. I don't think we will hit, I'm fairly confident so we won't hit that 2025 figure, but it will be very close, and it would be a bigger reduction than I've been able to find in any other local authority, major local authority in the city in this country. I'm not saying there isn't one, it's just I haven't been able to find it on a comparable data set.
I think it's really useful maybe for the future if we could get some clear data sets that we could compare. That would be very useful. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks for all that clarification. I think it really is important that there's so much has been done and there's so much already in the pipeline to continue the work, to go further regarding electricity, vehicles, heat, lighting and so on. What we've just got to hope is we can continue that investment, and I'm glad to say a report like this helps us attract investment, and other things being done through these projects and with our partners is helping to increase the amount of investment actually available in this city, in this region, which we should have access to. So without the projects, we couldn't get that investment. So the good thing is we now know much more about what we need to do, how to do it, and as long as the investment is there, we can go a lot further. Are there any other questions about the report? Okay. I'm glad to say we had a briefing about it. It's one very important part of the jigsaw in knowing what we need to do, both in the council and in the city by 2030. And I hope we can continue this work. So can we come to the recommendations? So we've got 4 written at the end of the report. This is a piece of European work. We should have emphasised that. I think we're extremely lucky that Bristol is since one of only 2 UK cities that are not in the EU, of course, but are able to be part of the Horizon Climate Neutral and Smart Cities mission for net zero. So we're lucky we're part of that. So we want to approve submission of this version of the One City Climate Commitments Action Plan and Investment Plan to support the achievement of the Council and the city's climate objectives. Secondly, we want to agree the submission of these documents to the Climate Neutral and Smart Cities Mission Initiative for their endorsement. We wish to delegate to the Executive Director for Growth and Regeneration the authority in consultation with myself, Chair of this committee, to amend the document, take any other necessary steps to respond to the feedback we might get in order to secure the endorsement of the Commission, and to endorse the Council's continued participation in the Climate Neutral and Smart Cities Mission Initiative, and again to delegate to the Executive Director for Growth and Regeneration the authority in consultation with the Chair to take steps as necessary to secure benefits for for Bristol from participation in the initiative. And with no further questions, I'd like to propose we move the report and the recommendations set out, and I hope someone will second it on the committee.
Seconded.
Thank you very much, Councillor King. Can I have an indication those who support those recommendations that we submit this? Thank you very much. And that is unanimous. That means that item is complete, and I'm delighted we'll be able to continue with this project. Thank you. So, we're now on to item 8, which is one of the things the Council can do to help decarbonise its impact. So we have agenda item 8, which is a report on green gas. And you ready to introduce that to us?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much.
So I'm Helen Reid, I head up the City Lead Climate and Energy Service. I'm joined by my colleague, the Energy Supply Manager, David Gray, who's going to talk you through some of the technical details around this paper, because as with a lot of energy papers, there's quite a bit of technical information in here. So gas is a significant contributor to our Bristol City Council carbon emissions. And whilst we've got work which my colleagues just alluded to in his paper as a council to reduce our gas demand, including energy efficiency measures on our buildings that we're developing with Bristol City Leap, and looking to replace gas boilers with connections to things like our district heat network, there's still going to be a dependency for the council on gas for some years to come as we work through what's really a very long tail of council buildings. We have been looking at what the options are for Bristol City Council to reduce the impact of our gas usage whilst those decarbonisation measures are happening alongside. So this report has got sort of threefold purpose. Firstly, we would like to seek the committee's approval to carry on using green gas as a carbon offsetting mechanism, which is what we are already currently doing to a certain extent on our estate. Secondly, to get approval on the extent of that green gas use, and as we go through the report, our proposal is to expand the current extent of our green gas use so that we are covering all sites that are within the scope of our 2025 decarbonisation target. And then finally, to agree the procurement mechanism that will follow to secure the volume of green gas, assuming the committee is happy for us to continue with our green gas purchase approach. That procurement mechanism will include some soft market testing, because there are various different ways you can procure green gas, and our recommendation is the report is that we look at soft market testing for unbundled certificates, and we'll explain what that means. This allows us to have, as a council, to have more control over the makeup of the green gas. So we might be able to say, actually, we do not want to include gas that's produced from fuel crops. David, do you want to talk through some of the options in more detail?
Could I just at this point make clear, especially for members of the public, there has been an updated version of the report to make very clear that distinction between green gas that might come from fuel crops and green gas that is from waste materials, the latter which we're trying to prioritise later. So there is an updated item for this report on the council's website, and that's the one we're talking to today. Thanks.
So as we've set out in the paper, there are a range of options for reducing the impact of the council's fairly considerable gas consumption. Obviously, using less gas would be a good start, and the energy efficiency measures are key to managing down that demand. But we will need to continue some gas for some considerable time. One of the options we're looking at is replacing gas heating with electrified heat. The heat pumps are expensive, and it will take a while to replace all the existing boilers on the estate. The district heat network is expanding. We have a number of council buildings now connected to it, but it's going to take time to build out the network. So really, we're for at least a few more years yet, we're going to be dependent upon a gas network of some sort. So we can look at what we'll put through that gas network. There are options for green hydrogen. So the government is looking at blending hydrogen into the gas grid. But that's really very immature, and I think that's something we'll probably look at next time round with the contract
using carbon offsets to offset the impact of the carbon we're emitting as a result of using gas. But we have some concerns over the reputability and the effectiveness of a number of carbon offsetting mechanisms. I think it's an area we would need to tread very carefully in. So I think our recommended approach for carbon offsetting for gas is green gas, because it is a carbon offsetting mechanism that's well understood, it's well established, and it relates directly to our gas usage. Green gas, just to clarify what we mean by that, is essentially a gas produced as a result of the decomposition of organic material. There's a lot more detail on this in the appendix, but you basically take some organic material, seal it in a container, throw in some microorganisms, let it stew for a bit, and what you get is a methane-rich gas and some solid digestate which can be used as a fertiliser. The important point is it's capturing the carbon that was in that organic waste has been captured and then turned into a gas which is then re-released, which makes it carbon neutral. We cannot pipe green gas directly into our buildings. Our buildings are connected to the national gas grid, so we are basically using the mixture that's in the gas grid. So that the way the green gas mechanism would work is we pay producers to produce green gas to inject that into the UK gas grid. So it's not, we don't switch grids, we still have the same supply as we did before, but there's less carbon in it as a result of the fact that we've bought green gas certificates, we're paying a producer to inject green gas into the network. I would make it very clear that the cost of green gas, and we set out some costs in the paper, this is in addition to regular, what we would call brown gas. So we have a gas supply, we have a gas bill for the gas that's supplied from the grid, and then on top of that, we buy green gas certificates. So to make it very clear, this is an extra cost. The current scope of green gas use, as Helen mentioned, we've used it across the estate for a little while now. This building, City Hall, and the two crematoria have been on green gas for some time. Originally, we had a target of 10% of our usage was green gas. Those three sites between them count for 9.5% of our current gas demand. But importantly, they account for 39% of our 2025 target population. So by using green gas in those buildings, we've already achieved over a third of the 2025 target. The gas usage is already covered by green gas. If you look at gas across the estate, and there's a diagram at the end of Appendix A, which sort of sets out where the gas is used across the council estate as a whole, and you'll see from that HRA is by far the largest gas user, but it's outside the scope of the 2025 target, it's covered by the 2030 target. But more importantly, if we do anything to increase the cost of gas going into HRA estate, where it's used primarily for communal heating systems, that's a cost that would have to be passed on to tenants. So our recommendation is that we don't go for green gas on that part of the estate. We revisit this in 2028 when our gas contracts come up for renewal. Schools already have the option to go into green gas, so the school approached us and said they wanted to go over to green gas. We could arrange it for them. We can't mandate it on them because they're self-governing. So if you take out HRA, you take out schools, our recommendation is that we look at expanding the green gas usage for the remaining 2/3 of the 2025 target estate, and basically have all the 2025 targets on green gas. The procurement of green gas, at the moment we buy green gas as bundled with our gas contract. So our gas supplier, we go to them and say we want so many kilowatt hours worth of gas certificates, and our existing supplier will go out and secure our GDO certificates, which is one of the leading schemes for green gas certificates. But under that, we have little or no control over how that gas is actually produced. Typically, if you look at averages across the country as a whole, about 25% of green gas production uses fuel crops. We're awaiting for a breakdown, we have asked but we haven't got it yet, and that sounds like we're not going to get it for a while, for a breakdown of our current supply. But in all probability, a quarter of that is coming from fuel crops in one form or another. So if we want to have a lot more control over how that green gas we're buying is generated, we have to disconnect it from the contract and go for an unbundled auction. And we can do that. We can go out to brokers and buy green gas certificates directly, and that would give us more control over how that gas is actually produced. So if you want to specify particular production methods or not particular production methods, so we want to say we don't want fuel crops involved, we'd have to go down the unbundled route. Our concern there is over the cost of that. The research we have been able to do suggests that if we go for a waste-only certificate, it will be more expensive, and it will need to be taken on whether we still want to do that given the cost, but certainly we believe it's an option. And from the discussions we've had with a handful of brokers, we believe the volumes are out there, so we believe it is a viable option, but we need to do some market testing to confirm that. There is, we've spoken in Cabinet before and the previous committee meeting, we've spoken about sleeving for electricity. There is an equivalent for gas. So we could pay a local gas producer directly to produce gas to inject into the network on our behalf. Our thinking at the moment is if there are any potential gas producers out there, it's going to be very small volumes. We're not ruling it out, we just don't think it's going to be the major provider to meet the volumes of gas that we're looking at. So our recommended approach, if the committee agrees that we should continue to use green gas as a carbon offset mechanism for our gas usage, and that we should expand it to cover the whole of the 2025 target estate population, we would then look to go out and carry out some market testings to confirm the availability and the affordability of the green gas. And if all that lines up, we'll come back to the Chair and Deputy Chair and seek approval to proceed with a contract to buy those unbundled certificates.
Thanks very much. Just to clarify, so having visited with local traders who had food waste, visited Genico and Avonmouth, they produce green gas from waste, don't they? Sewage waste and food waste. So that would be typical of the type of gas we're trying to get hold of. If we look for unbundled certificates that are waste-based.
It absolutely would, and in fact, we used to have a supply from Genico when we had a gas supply from Bristol Energy. When Bristol Energy folded, that contract got moved on to a different supplier, so unfortunately it's not available to us.
Okay, so in the updated report, just to be clear, it suggests that we should try to procure unbundled green gas certificates. We want to look for certification that does not come from fuel crops but from waste, and certainly that was a priority of the Deputy Chair and myself, and that we need to find out what premium that might be, since that certification is a bit dearer. It's a percentage or whatever extra on the cost of the gas, and we need to find out that there are sufficient volumes. And if that isn't available, while we're still using gas, we would have to procure bundled green gas certificates where we wouldn't necessarily know the origin. So that's just to be clear what is in the recommended in the report that's been updated. So the updated recommendation is to suggest we do look for this gas. We try to get it unbundled. We will get the report back to Councillor King and myself to confirm that's available, what kind of premium there might be for that unbundled certification. Are there any questions or clarifications needed? Okay, Councillor King.
As far as I'm sure. Thanks very much for all your hard work on this and for spending the time with myself and Councillor Fodor working us through it. Much appreciated. So I think, to be clear, using food waste and organic matter and breaking that down and using that is a good thing and a useful thing and an efficient thing. So repurposing waste products that would have already emitted gas anyway is fine. For me, the big concern, well, I've got a couple of concerns, but if that's the extent of it, then that's acceptable. But if we go down the route of where we look at fuel crops being a potential source for this, then that's completely unacceptable, I think. Fuel crops are a monoculture crop, they're intensively grown, they deplete nutrients in the soil, they're bad for biodiversity. They can also compete with very precious agricultural land for food growing, that will be making food that we won't be eating, it will be used for fuel, and that raises very significant concerns and questions around food security. So it's not good for food security, it's not good for biodiversity. I'm concerned that we're doing this slightly the wrong way round, and I've voiced this several times, that I think that we should have done the soft market testing and then brought that to the committee. We need to know the information before we can approve the decision, to empower us to understand where our gas is going to come from and what the sources are. You know, we can go off the national averages and sort of predict the 25%, but we don't know yet until we've done that, we've done that research. So I think the committee would want to know, you know, how much land is potentially being used to produce these crops that are not going to be feeding people but being processed and turned into fuel, and where is this land, and also what are the carbon and methane emissions associated with this method of gas production. I think it's really, I'm minded about the last report that just came through about the One City climate strategy that aims for us to become carbon neutral, but that also encompasses the ambitions to cover all greenhouse gases and all scopes of emissions. And I would challenge us on methane being one of those that is incredibly potent, heats our planet quicker than CO2, contaminates the air, the water and the soil that we depend on. And the public health implications of that, I've not seen referenced in any of the many amendments associated with this paper. And as we're a Health in All Policies Council, that is a slight concern for me as well. So obviously, the unbundled certificates is the preferred option. It's very difficult to approve something until we know what exactly those unbundled certificates are going to look like. It's likely that after this discussion we're going to ask for a little adjournment to discuss an amendment just to see if the committee would be happy for this to come back to us to discuss once, because I think it's only fair that everyone should know the source of this gas before we make a decision about how we go to it. But we'll see how we get on with the questions and see how members feel about that. So I'll leave it there for now. I've got very strong concerns about this. You've heard them all before. I'm just, you know, we need to know where these crops are coming from, what the associated emissions are. Otherwise, I really worry that this is just a form of greenwashing. Thanks.
Could I just be clear, Councillor King? So this actually asks our officers to seek gas from waste, not from crops. So if they can do that, there won't be any land use, there won't be any crops.
It does, and then it says, failing that, we would seek to procure bundled green gas certificates from the BCC gas supplier as before.
So let's see if there are other questions which might make sense. We've got Councillor Dudd and then Councillor Flynn.
Thanks for the work you've done on this. Can I just ask, because obviously what we're trying to meet is demand for gas, and obviously that ties into the buildings that we own and operate, and so I just wondered how closely we're working with the property team in terms of, so there's a number of buildings that we own and operate at the moment, but there's still a question mark over it, including some of our crematoriums. Well, one of them at least. I don't think we've made a decision on one of them. Obviously, when or if and when that decision is made, that will have an impact on the demand for gas. And it's probably the same for a large number of buildings. And I imagine the use of the gas is going to be, as you say, in the tail, isn't it? The library building that's miles away from a heat network. So just wondered where we are with that, and also with the City Leap work programme, in terms of have we put what work have we done in terms of a time frame for when we get to each one of those buildings and to electrify them. But obviously, I think you probably need to know whether that building is going to be open when we get around to do the measures. So just wonder what cooperation there's been on that. And then also gas production, green gas production. Is that something the City Leap are looking at? Because obviously we produce hundreds of tonnes, thousands of tonnes of food waste each year in Bristol and the west of England. And we send all that to a private company to be processed and used, and they make the profit from it. And if we've got a joint venture company that's got the right to do something like that in our city, where some of that money stays in the city, then I think that's maybe something they should potentially consider doing instead of an alternative company going into that, taking money out of Bristol rather than keeping the money in Bristol.
So in terms of the corporate estate, we are working very closely with colleagues in the corporate landlord, making sure that we are checking before we start any city projects on buildings that are due to be disposed, and those that have got an uncertain future, we're taking that into account in project development. There are certain buildings that we have included in the top 30 that we have double checked a number of times, and we keep that position under review. Obviously, as decarbonisation projects are brought forward, that will reduce our reliance on the green gas, because we will not then need to buy green gas for those particular buildings. So from my perspective, it's a really positive thing that we can work with City Leap on some of those projects to decarbonise, and they are actively working up programmes at the moment. They've got projects, development project for the next 10 buildings at the moment, and also looking specifically at additional projects on buildings like Camford Crematorium. In terms of the anaerobic food waste, that is something that we can certainly talk about with our colleagues in waste as well as with City Leap, and investigate whether it's something that's a potential option for City Leap to look at.
Councillor Finch?
No, please. Thank you. Firstly I wanted to say that I shared Councillor King's concerns about using fuel crops and the sort of implications for biodiversity and for food security. So obviously, we all know that we want to get it from waste, the green gas, but that may well end up being more expensive, and I do think that if it does turn out to be more expensive and that decision needs to be made at that point, it would be good to have reassurance either that it would come back to the committee or come back to Councillor King and Councillor Fodor as the chair and vice chair of the committee. So reassurance on that would be really good. I also had some other questions, but is that already...
So the recommendation at the moment is that we come back to the chair and deputy chair before we make any decision on the actual procurement of the green gas. So if they were not happy with the option for the unbundled approach, and we're not comfortable with the option for the bundled approach, we would then not go ahead and procure it.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. So I had a couple of other questions, if that's okay. One was about sort of looking ahead to 2028 when this gas contract will come to an end, and obviously being aware of that 2030 target, which is a wider target. What are you, obviously this green gas is an intermediary solution. and it relies on us finding ways to reduce our demand for gas. In the meantime, how far do you predict that we will have got by 2028? Will that be a noticeable difference in our gas demand at that stage when we have to seek that next contract?
It's very difficult to say 2028, but the development build-out of the heat network will be a very important part of reducing our demand on gas. Obviously, developing and building out heat networks takes time, it's not a slow process, but the intention is that we will have made substantial progress on our council's corporate estate, both in terms of key heat network connections or electrifying our heat supplies in our buildings, moving to air source or ground source heat pumps instead of gas boilers. We're also working actively on a number of projects in our social housing estate, and although the target is to bring their social housing up to EPCC is out to 2030, we're seeing a lot of work on both the energy efficiency measures, which will reduce heat demand, but also working on projects for electrifying and moving away from gas boilers on those buildings as well.
Thank you. And is it good to ask one final question? Thank you. Yeah, so the final one was sort of relating to housing and to a certain extent schools as well. So, you know, I guess what we're talking about today is from the overall gas demand increasing from 10% being green gas to 30% being green gas. But in the report it says how housing is, I think, 48%, so it is significantly bigger again. But obviously it's a different situation because it wouldn't be Bristol City Council fitting the bill, it would be people living within the housing. And I know that you said that's going to be sort of something that we consider, you know, ahead of that 2028 contract. But I wondered if there were plans for collaboration between this committee and the housing committee before then to, you know, sort of so that we're ready. Because I don't feel that that's a decision that this committee can make without collaborating with the housing committee.
Yes, Councillor Finch, that's correct, and we've already had initial discussions between City League, joint venture, or our client, and the chair of their Homes and Communities Committee, and myself as chair of this committee. It's got to be collaboration, and it's all about working across committees. We want to see the decarbonisation and the achieving the sort of climate objectives, and they want to improve the housing and, of course, keep residents, keep tenants warm. So it's very much a sort of joint approach. Obviously, they have to have the investment available. It's got to fit in with their refurbishment and improvement and management plans. And that's why it's very much about joint working, because we can't tell them what to do and when they've got a whole capital and revenue programme that they've got to manage. But that's the approach, it's all about joint working. I don't know if you want to say more. There's a whole programme of retrofitting programmes and heat improvement programmes across that estate, happening at the best pace it can, I guess.
Nothing further to add to that, thank you.
Thanks. Okay, and Councillor Kent, yeah.
Thanks, Chair. I think mine's more of a point than a question, but you might want to come back on a few of the points. I have some reluctance around this approach, but at the same time, I will go with it. It's based on when we had our initial discussion, when we looked at the initial reports, it was said that although we've got a 4-year price in, at any point we could review that each year. And I think that gives me more confidence to support this proposal. My concern is, in one sense, it is a bit like a carbon offsetting scheme, but very, very specific, which is welcomely specific. But of course, that comes at a price, and that is basically at around about £100 per tonne of carbon, which is at the higher end when it comes to carbon offsetting. And I guess my concern is that, you know, we could be planting new woodland at less than half that price. I accept woodland has its own issues about being a carbon offset, whether or not that's just a short-term solution. So I guess sort of the point I want to make is that it's essential that the costs of this do not soar, and that the response to that is that we've given a budget heading, so we buy a lot less carbon offset. And I would just like for us to make sure that we're annually reviewing the use of this money, to make sure this is still the best value in the sense of meeting this problem. Because obviously it is a problem. You know, gas supply to these buildings is very difficult to replace. We understand the problem, and so this is a good short-term proposal. But I think at the same time, as long as we can keep reviewing it and make sure costs don't significantly increase per tonne of carbon that we're displacing, maybe it's a preferred word to offsetting, then I'm happy to support it. Thanks.
Thanks very much. So the budgets are reviewed annually. We talked about the budget envelope in the report, and I think the interesting thing is by finding the most sustainable gas and the most specific kind of reliable source of that's waste-based, that is affecting, that's sending a signal to each service that they need to find ways to improve their performance, and so switching to electric. Operation of the crematoria, for instance, switching to renewable forms of heat for other sites in the council estate will become ever more viable. As we say, that's the alternative. We've got projects that reduce our need for that heat or that power, and then we've got a premium if we're continuing to use gas, for instance. So it does add a premium, but it's within a budget envelope that is reviewed annually. I can see the heads nodding by the officers, so that will take place. Okay. Councillor King, you had another.
Yeah, thanks. Part of me does feel like I'm in a bit of a twilight zone here, because the committee's been asked to make a decision, and the decision is to let myself and Councillor Fodor make the decision, the substantive decision, once the well-informed decision. And I'm just questioning what's the point of this committee if they're not the ones making the substantive decision, the well-informed decision. I just find that really interesting, considering some of the people in the parties here that campaigned for this design of system. That's an interesting thing for me. But just to sort of help visualise some of these things, because I've said this before, my brain does not, I can't hardly even get over the image of burning crops that we grow rather than feeding people. And we've got, the soaring food prices and all the rest of it, which is attributed in part, global wars, obviously a huge part of it as well, but in part due to the subsidising of farmers to grow fuel crops, and then being incentivised to do that rather than grow food for eating. But I don't know if this part of the document made it into the committee papers, I'm not sure. But officers did circulate a paper that talks about if our supply was based on the UK average of 25%, that would require about 127 football fields worth of fuel crops. So that's kind of like, and it could be more than that, it could be up to 500 if you went for, it wouldn't be up to 500, but that's the extreme other end. But if it was the average, it would be 127 football fields. And I just think that's quite, and this is in East Anglia, this land as well. I don't know if you can visualise that, but that for me that's quite it's quite an upsetting concept, I think. And I really think that it should be a decision that's made by everyone in this room on this committee, not just myself and Councillor Bodle.
Chair, it's more of a question. How time specific is this decision need to be made? Is there a looming deadline that means that we can bring it back to the next committee or yeah?
So the reason that we want to come to this committee is the decision is not just about the method of procurement, which is the bundled and unbundled, but it's very difficult to go out and do a soft market testing exercise and get accurate data in terms of what is available to provide the green gas and how much that will cost, unless we've got certainty of the scope of that procurement exercise. So the first two asks are to approve the continued use that we already have of 10% bundled green gas, plus the expansion to the entirety of the corporate estate. In terms of the procurement exercise, once we've done the soft market testing. I don't believe there's a particular time sensitive pressure there, but we do need to make sure that we have got a plan in place, because what we don't want to be doing is sort of not having a well planned out procurement and then ending up sort of having to rush it at the end.
That's right. There is no direct time pressure in that there's any sort of contracts coming up for renewal. The gas contracts are now running until September 28. So this is in addition to the gas contract. Therefore, we can take some time to have a considered decision with either sort of time pressure to do it for any specific date. Obviously, if we're going to make this change, we want to do it as soon as we can, but we do have time for a considered decision.
Okay, so we could reasonably vote today, to do the soft market testing, if you successfully find a green gas supply that doesn't require any food crops, then you don't need to. But if it requires it to come back because of bundled certificates, then we could bring it back. Is that a procedure that we could do? I should ask the chair actually. Is that a procedural thing that we could do where we come back if we are unable to determine a gas supply without any fuel crops or kind of extension, as it were? I can explain that very well.
I think the recommended approach is actually pretty clear. It's saying go and look for gas from waste, not from fuel crops. That approach is clear, so you can go and do that if we agree with the recommendation. What it adds is that if you can't find enough of that, or if the premium is way beyond the budget envelope, the committee could allow two of us, as a cross-party chair and vice chair, to agree that we weren't able to find it, and we can still proceed as a fallback. So the question is, to me, is are you happy that we know exactly what we're trying to do? The officers are being sent away if we follow the updated paragraph 14 and the updated recommendation 1, that we are going to go and look for that. The council will look for that. It will confirm, with Councillor King and myself, we're both in agreement, I think along with the rest of you, that we should look for waste-based green gas with those unbundled certificates. It's a question of whether you think we can say go ahead or not go ahead. Well, then we would have to amend it. If we don't approve it as it stands, we would have to amend it. We have to say you're dividing a paragraph in the report. That's what you would be doing, and saying come back. It's updated paragraph 14, the word failing that. So if you think we will fail that, and you don't trust us to stop that procurement, or to agree the amount of premium we can pay, then we have to come back. But we would first have to reject the recommendation and have an amendment that allows us to say, come back instead of leaving it in our hands. We would need to reject the recommendation in the first place, because that's what's tabled, and then we'd have to agree an amendment that basically divides that paragraph at the word failing and said, instead, if you can't find it, come back and tell us. What we would then do is probably have the same debate and say we'd rather find waste-based gas, but we might not be able to. There might not be enough. So what would we do then? Councillor Finch?
Well, yeah, so I guess I think we would be able to have a discussion if it came back and we found out that we couldn't get enough waste bit, because at the moment it's quite theoretical because we don't know what the options are. So and we all agree that we would like the waste-based ones, and we would like to avoid the fuel crops. But I can imagine that could be quite a difficult decision, and a discussion could be really valuable once we have that information, if that does happen, that we can't, either because of financial reasons or because of supply, get all the green gas that we need from waste. So yeah, I think a discussion at that point could be really valuable, and it's not something that we can do now.
I'm just going to get to my advice, but I don't think a further debate would change what's available or its price, would it? Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, I just wanted to, we're working our way through the committee system, aren't we, and learning how to make it work effectively. I suppose I just wanted to run through in my mind. So the process that gets papers to this point is that they're developed by officers, and they come to an agenda briefing, which has the chair and the deputy chair and party representatives in. And at that, the original wording in terms of the approach, both of the recommendation and then the contractual bit, really about the implementation of that. And that includes the authorisation for the executive director in consultation with the chair and deputy chair, which is the approach that was agreed at that agenda to make the decisions. Sorry, Councillor.
No, I've objected to this at every level. Have I not, Councillor Fodor? I've very clearly said throughout that I think the soft market testing should be done first, then it should come to committee. I'm pretty sure officers can confirm that I've said that at every level, every step of the way. I said it in the agenda briefing as well when Councillor Kent was there. So, yeah, that's... I've said this at every step. I even said it this morning.
So the approach in the paper that says that wasn't agreed at the agenda briefing?
No. No, my understanding was that the soft market testing was going to get done first, and then the information from that was going to come to the committee for them to make an informed decision. But also, there's a separate thing here. I'm quite disappointed by the lack of leadership on this, I'm afraid, because that is not the only options that can come back here. We need to be looking at the council's estate and how to reduce our energy consumption. It needs to be a more holistic, more strategic point. And I know there's a lot of work going on now, huge amounts of work from officers, but it needs to be going to this committee so they can understand that. We have buildings that aren't being used at their full capacity and they're using huge amounts of energy. We need to be drawing that in. We need to be discussing about how the best ways to reduce our energy consumption first and foremost. That needs to be coming to this committee before we discuss this. It's a part of it, and it's a big issue, it's a holistic issue. I appreciate that takes a lot of council's time, but they're not making a well-informed decision because this information has been brought to them. So I think, yes, this is a 4-year contract, but it's going to be 20 years before we have the district heat network fully rolled out. So what's going to come back to us in 4 years' time? The renewal of this suggestion? We need to be thinking about this in a long-term, strategic, holistic way. Thank you.
Right. So, just before I come to Councillor Tate, so we've just had a report that says there's a lot of work to do. There are an awful lot of projects, and they've been assembled for the first time. We've just agreed to the assembly of that report, the prior item we've had, and we know there's a 30-year. We know that the top 30 sites in the council are all being assessed, and there's a programme. So I'm a bit concerned. You think that what's been in place for all these years wasn't strategic, because it's taken several years. It's been in place for a long time, and we've been working our way through them as far as investment and project by project is available. And we know that the big gas users have been identified in this report, and we will be wanting to find ways to move them off gas onto a clean electricity sort of technology. But this report is about a specific thing that has to be done to continue to power those buildings in the meantime, and it's very clearly been billed as a sort of interim thing, and the most sustainable option is the one we're seeking. So I hope that's clear, and I'm just wondering if you didn't think it was clear, but we could have a second report that tells us what's been found, and then we'd still be able to approve or not approve based on the budget that is available.
I'd be interested to know if these new members were aware of all that in the detail that is needed to make this decision.
Yeah.
Like, we might know, we've been around the block, but we've got new members here who haven't, and those briefings, you know, they need to be made available to all members if they're going to make an informed decision.
Yeah, certainly. And in the last meeting you said you were concerned there were too many briefings for members who didn't have a lot of time. But we still had a briefing so that members were aware of the report we just had before this. So you can either have more briefings or fewer, but at the moment we're asking for more rather than the fewer you wanted last time. But let's hear what Councillor Tate has to say.
I just want to say, obviously, a lot of the councillors here, we've all mentioned around the fact that we do not want to use, fuel crops, and actually there's the risk, like you said, about the carbon offsetting, that actually a lot of the carbon then goes back out into the atmosphere from the fuel crops from turning the soil. So actually all you're doing is displacing those carbon offsets. So that's obvious that we've all agreed with that. And so essentially what we're asking for is an amendment to the document, and then for that to be brought back while they go out to soft market. But also I would just argue that, this is for the next 4 years. Currently, Kaida, as he has explained, we are selling our waste product out. That contract is due to end in about 3 years' time, and so the fact that the prices are then looked at yearly, can we then, that gives us time to look at, okay, so do you not do that next time? Like, will we then, what do we do with our waste? And as Councillor King said, it's going to take 20 years before we move to the district heat network. So actually I think there's more work to be done on, yes, this is what we need to do for now, but what is that price point, and what are we doing for the future?
Thank you. Yeah, we are also responsible for waste, and we'll no doubt get a report on the options for that at the next time that comes up. So do we want to procedurally? I think we have to agree whether or not we agree with the recommendation, and if we want to amend it. So let's be clear of that. But yeah,
just try to be helpful. Just 3 quick points. Number 1, I was in the meeting where Councillor King did raise her concerns about the recommendation. So just to confirm, I did hear her raise those. I logged off about 2 minutes later and even used it in a heated discussion over the report because it was quite late in the day at that point. Secondly, it was my understanding the way we built the Constitution, and I'd be interested to know if it actually reads that way, that if a chair, vice chair, or even any member of this committee is unhappy with a delegated decision or decision being made by officers in consultation with you, it can be basically called into the committee for public discussion. I'm unsure if that actually reached the detail of the Constitution or not, but it should have done. That was the ethos we were looking for. But I think if the Vice Chair is more comfortable, and as a committee member I'm comfortable, and the officers seem to say it wasn't a super pressing day, why not agree that we will bring the final report back here to confirm on this occasion? Because it doesn't seem like there will be a negative financial impact on the authority for us to do that.
Yeah, thank you. And as I just said, so the first thing to do is say, do we want the recommendation as it stands or not, which refers to the particular wording in paragraph 14. If we want to break it at the 3rd line of that, and rather than say failing that, sorry, I'm just looking at the right bit. If we want to vary it, then we can go ahead and do that, provided we put aside the original recommendation. So we have to vote, do we want to continue with the original recommendation, or set that aside and seek a different wording? So that's the first thing we could do.
So Chair, shall I propose an amendment then that the report that the
no, we have to first look at the recommendation.
So I don't do things.
Sorry, just to go over the governance slightly. We'll move the recommendation so that it can move as in approve the recommendation for discussion. If that's seconded, then we can, rather than reject it outright, then we'll continue. Someone can then raise an amendment at that point, which would be seconded and voted on. I would suggest, if this is going where I think we're likely to vote on that, I would suggest we take a short break, just adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes so we can clarify some of that wording. and then I would assume Councillor King would propose a motion to amend. That would be seconded, that would be voted on. If that motion is then approved, it would be incorporated into the final recommendation, and we could vote on that here and now.
So the first thing is to see if we want to proceed with the recommendation as written. Is that right?
But to proceed with the paper and allow amendments to take place. So we just move the report as in open it up to the committee, have it seconded. We're not approving the recommendation at that point, we're just moving the recommendation.
So you need us to move and second that we're opening up the report.
Yes.
So shall we do that first?
Please.
We move the report so that we can then deal with this, as we said. So I've seconded to do that.
Can I clarify that we can't amend the report unless we second it now? Is that what you're saying? So we have to second it so that we can then make this amendment.
Yeah.
If the report is not seconded now, it means it's rejected outright, and we
don't want to reject it, so we want to agree we've got the report, but then adjust the recommendation following that.
I mean, technically the chair could move an altered recommendation and agree.
Have you got one in mind? I'm quite happy to do that if that's constitutional.
If you have
constitutional point,
if you have wording ready to propose,
you have a wording ready?
I would recommend that we move the report so that we can propose an amendment, then maybe take a couple of minutes just to clarify the wording, because we'll need to be really clear on what is being voted on, if that suits the committee.
I'm happy with that, and it sounds like you probably have a wording ready that you would like to propose as an amendment. So we have to then first move the report to allow that to happen, okay? So I'm proposing that. Is that seconded?
Yeah, I'm happy to second it. I also have ideas for how it could be amended. So if you
that's the next thing we need to do. Yeah.
Yes, so we can say that the report has been moved. We can proceed to the next step, but I suggest we adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes so that we can clarify some of the wording and then take a propose an amendment and vote on that afterwards.
Okay, shall we do that? So we're going to adjourn for 2 minutes and seconded the report. Okay, thank you. We'll do that. Do bring your amendments forward. Okay, so updating paragraph 14, so this is changing the original updated report. The recommended approach would be to procure unbundled green gas certificates with certification that does not come from fuel crops but from waste, if affordable and sufficient volumes are available. That's unchanged. At that point we cross out the line starting failing that and instead put, if deemed unviable, a report will return to the Environment and Sustainability Committee with options for the committee to consider on how to progress. So that's the proposal in the report, and then the recommendation still stands, which is to do as outlined in the report, but using that revised paragraph, saying, if deemed unviable, a report will return to the committee, etc. So it brings it back instead of it being done under chair and vice chair or under a delegation. Are we happy that that is how we proceed? Excellent, thank you. So are we now ready?
Just to make sure we do this correctly, do you want to make sure someone moves an amendment and seconds it and then we can vote on it? Just so we avoid any problems.
So you're talking about this revision as shown on. Okay, so if I propose the revision as shown on the screen, is that now seconded?
Sorry, that's it. Are you proposing the amendment or is Councillor King proposing the amendment? Oh. Either way, yeah, by all means, we don't need to second that.
So are you happy to second that if I propose that?
Just want to say that you mentioned change to the second paragraph. It's probably worth mentioning.
The lower paragraph that's now, yeah, off the screen, says following that process and it coming to committee, it's then implemented by the chair in conjunction with the executive director. So it doesn't mention the vice chair at that point. That's the other difference. Okay? Right. So we're happy that's been proposed and seconded. You seconding that?
Seconded.
So we're ready to vote on the recommendation with that as the changed part of the report. Those are the changes in the report. Yeah? Okay. So we need to read who's in favour of that?
So just to clarify the wording slightly, we're now voting on the amendments to make sure that the amendment passes, and after that we would vote on the recommendation as a substantive motion.
Okay, so we're agreeing to put that amendment into the report. Okay, okay, those in favour? Excellent, unanimous. Right, so that's approved. So that's in the report. So we're now voting on the recommendation. I propose the recommendation to carry that out. Can that be seconded?
Seconded.
Thank you very much, Councillor King. So can we vote on that? Those in favour of that? Unanimous again. Well, I'm glad we've got that. Thank you. Appreciative audience. I think the camera's still recording. It's got a red light. So we've got to the end of that item. So we now... Thank you for that. I'm glad we're satisfied, and it will be in front of the committee if we don't get what we're looking for. So we're on to agenda item 9, Bristol Tree and Woodland Strategy. Okay, we have an officer to introduce that. Thank you very much. If you'd like to introduce yourself and then just highlight the main points of this report. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, hello, I'm Richard Elliott, Parks Development Manager based in the Park Service, and I'm going to talk you through the report this evening. There is a small slide deck that perhaps we could put on the screen, if that's available. No. Oh yes, that looks. No,
that's
the strategy itself.
The report starts at page 233 in the papers, and that is the appendix to that report.
Yeah, that's the strategy itself. I did include a short presentation to help me take you through the strategy. If not, I will carry on.
It's page 293 in the
That's the presentation. So if I perhaps just talk to that. Hi, good evening. So I'll start with just clarifying what the ask is here, effectively the recommendation which is in the report. And what I'm doing is seeking Bristol City Council's support for a strategy which has been written to reflect the whole city. So it's a one city tree and woodland strategy. So I'm seeking support, using the word endorsement, I think. So on that basis, this is a tree and woodland strategy for the city. And I'm making the point that it has been developed collaboratively. And you will see that there has been some statements submitted by a number of organisations that have been involved in the development of the strategy. Forest and Baden Trust, the Woodland Trust, the Natural History Consortium, and indeed you've got Mark Ashton here representing the Bristol Tree Forum and his statement, as you've seen, obviously raises a question. So in that light. Just the next slide, please. So in effect, in the document bundle, there is a strategy, and there are many pages to that strategy. So I'm really giving you a flavour of it, rather than attempting to go through it line by line. So headline is it's the whole city. It is about trees and woodland, and it's been developed collaboratively. It includes a number of information about where we are currently in respect to trees and woodland within Bristol. So these are two maps to illustrate that. So we know where tree canopy is sufficiently to be able to map it, and the map on the left doesn't do that, and the map on the right helps us to understand the distribution, and clearly it is uneven, and it ranges from about 10% or so to about 28%. That in itself raises questions, and the strategy helps to understand what we should be doing about that. Next slide, please. So, just telling you, we have done this collaboratively. We had a number of workshops and invited a number of organisations to attend, and we also did some public-facing engagements, which became a talking trees concept, and the illustrations there are some demonstration that notes were taken, that people were involved, and that we've received information and ideas from stakeholders, but also members of the public too, and that's funneled into what the strategy is trying to do, is to support our ambitions around trees and woodland. The next slide, please. So, picking out the headlines of what the strategy is saying, it does have a vision, and the vision is that Bristol is a city of trees, where trees thrive, and their benefits are shared equally to maximise the health and well-being of all citizens. So that's the headline statement. And the strategy aims to achieve, in headline terms, to increase the tree canopy to 20% by 2040, currently from 18%, and for Bristol's woodlands, which mostly will be sites of nature conservation interest, to be managed in a positive way, to meet the Managed for Wildlife standard by 2030. That's referencing the ecological emergency strategy for the city and Bristol City Council's own ambitions in relation to that. And ultimately the national and international goals for 30% of land being managed for nature by 2030, the 30 by 30. So the golden thread is there, but that's a statement in relation to woodland. And the strategy sets out how we'll do that by identifying effectively challenges and how they can be overcome and how opportunities can be realised. It introduces a number of flagship projects which are there to focus attention and ultimately how we might then attract resources to deliver the ambition and focus attention to do so. And ultimately, the strategy introduces and takes a stance around delivering benefits. So it's a benefits-focused approach. And if I just segue to the next slide, I've got my order right. So, canopy targets are fine, 20% is the figure, but ultimately it's about why we're doing it. So it's about understanding where the benefits lie. So this map, which is an aggregate, is a way to express benefits using criteria. We call them the tree impact criteria, we maybe call ticks, we maybe call something else, but effectively that's what they are. And so these are a combination really of addressing social environmental inequity. So we've got areas of high deprivation, and we know that well-planted trees, areas that are well planted with trees in a considered manner, then that can help to address disadvantaged issues. So that's a criterion. We've also recognised that areas of the city have got lower tree canopy than average, or the average figure. That in itself creates an inequity. So the first maps I put up showed you that, and so this is an attempt to weight attention to areas of lower tree canopy, recognising that that's something we should be thinking of addressing. And then two further criteria. One is about nature recovery, the degree to which we see opportunities to connect fragmented habitats like woodland, either through more woodland or expanding existing woodlands, or indeed connecting woodlands where it's less possible to create woodlands by planting trees or street trees, for example. So how that can achieve that. And the fourth criterion is picking up on the Keep Bristol Cool work, which has identified urban heat risk and populations particularly vulnerable to such, and the degree to which trees become part of the solution. Effectively, trees can be very good at natural air conditioners. So together, what this is trying to identify is areas where if we have the opportunity to plant trees, this isn't a map of where they can go, this is a map of where they should go, if we can do it, to identify areas of greatest benefit. And we can play around with this in different ways. You can look at criteria alone, or you can combine them. This is an attempt to create a combined map to illustrate it in a strategy. But in effect, it should be helping to drive attention to where we should be focusing tree and wood management. The next one, please. There's been a lot of talk ultimately about what is the baseline in terms of Bristol's tree canopy. So this isn't in the strategy, it's a piece of new information. The strategy states where we are currently in terms of baseline, and that is about 18% tree cover across the city, 18.2. That information is provided to us by a third party. In 2020, when we last received that data 3 years ago, so it's 2020 to 2023 data, it was 16.9%, so it has gone up quite a bit. The question is, how real is that? So I can't give you a perfect answer. I effectively have the data. What we did, though, is we attempted to compare. So this is what Bristol's done with that data provided to us nationally. We've overlaid and understood where canopies remain the same, canopy has been lost, because trees do get felled, and where canopy has been added. So overall, the data is showing the balance is increased from 2020 to 18.2. In this case, just centred on the middle of the map, you can see quite a lot of splotches of yellow. So that is an area of woodland that we planted through our One Tree per Child scheme in 2015. Now, whilst this is a one city strategy, and I'm now talking about what Bristol City Council has done, to some degrees, it is relevant to the point whereby young woodland eventually becomes canopy that you can measure. So this 3 years ago didn't pick up on the data. Now it does. So this isn't, I'm not saying that 16.9 to 18.2 is just all growth. There may be some measurement errors. We'll find out the next measurement round in another 3 years' time. But I can point to areas where we can see loss, we can see growth, and we can see the same. And that's what I'm just showing you that. The next slide, please. So there's a number of themes: increasing tree canopy, managing existing woodlands, protecting trees and woodlands, focus on participation, and a note to Bristol's global role. It is more of a note reflecting that ultimately we do purchase trees and timber, and so that where they come from. It's about to some degree what we eat actually, because forests internationally have been threatened to some degree by agriculture and how we might influence that. So there's some notes to that. The next slide, please. And then a number of flagship projects have been identified to help us focus attention. Bristol Green Canopy approach, Street Tree Renaissance, Bristol's Garden Forest, the Bristol Orchard, Bristol's Natural Woodland, tree city. So these are kind of giving some identity, I suppose, and some focus of attention to making the change that the strategy is talking about, and ultimately they will need resources, of which there are opportunities to do that, and having a strategy which partners and organisations are behind will help us to do that. I think that's my last slide. And there's a picture. Those trees don't actually exist. That is an image of what it could look like. So that's a typical street. There are not those trees there currently. It could look like that. It's an image of transformation. So I just give you that opportunity to see what it could look like. That's the end of my presentation. I'm not going to include you for questions if you so wish.
Thanks very much, Richard. Really helpful. Covered a lot of ground there. Well, I have a sort of question in that we have areas that are missing tree canopy and missing street trees. And will this help us, or can we go to partners with this One City document now to ask them to help us to make sure we can fund more trees in streets that don't currently have trees, just as you've illustrated at the end there, for instance?
Well, that's what it's designed to do. Clearly, where landowners have got land, they've got the options to plant trees on them, and we do. Where organisations, businesses, private individuals see an opportunity to be part of that solution, then it's about resources that can come in. And we do have a current tree sponsorship scheme. Again, I'm talking about the council, but it's about how business and organisations and private individuals can solve the problem really by providing the resources to enable trees to be planted. And there's opportunities to grow that. So then you create a relationship and a partnership really between, in this case, the council having an opportunity to create a platform to deliver that, and then how individuals can be supportive of it. And we've clearly got a quite comprehensive support arrangement in terms of Forest Labour Trust. Whilst the strategy doesn't reference this specifically because it's in train, there are applications to governments about creating a new national forest for the region, and that will potentially bring in significant funding, and that then potentially will be helping to unlock some of these ambitions in this strategy. The strategy should be updated as things evolve. I haven't referenced it here because it's effectively an application not yet submitted, but these are examples that relate to, I think, your question of how we're going to get there.
Thanks very much. So it's a non-key decision, but we're being asked to endorse it. But does anyone have any questions? Okay, so 1, 2, 3. Okay, we're going to start with Councillor Crawford, then work down, and then. Oh yeah, feel free. Thank you for that. And then.
Thank you. Thanks for bringing the report. It's good to read that through the One Tree Per Child and the Tree Bristol planting programs that you're celebrating 100,000 trees being planted since 2015. It's a fantastic achievement. I did read in the report about the issue of ash dieback disease, that a lot of trees in Bristol are ash trees. That obviously it continues to be a huge problem, but is it still as big as a problem as it used to be, or was it just, I'm trying to think the right way to say it, or is it just sort of stabilised but still spreading? And then secondly, that in the sort of practical challenges that the council face, it says that residents lack the information to assess the risks posed with ash dieback disease. How do you plan to sort of change that so residents are more aware of the risks?
I think ash dieback's been quite well covered in the news. So it is a new disease. It's really only been here in this country for about 10, 12 years. It has caused devastation in terms of loss, particularly in the continent, and we're seeing that in this country. So most ash trees now are infected, and you will see that in the degree to which trees die back. From our perspective, it's about risk management, so some of those trees don't become dangerous. If it's fall off, then when the tree falls over. There are a lot of ash trees in the city. The statistics suggest that 1 in 6. Most of those are in woodland, actually, rather than being in street trees, because they're not a regular street tree. Not a regular parking tree most of the time. But we do know where our ash trees are as a city, and we have an ash dieback protocol for dealing with them. So it is significant, and it is going to result in some loss. In terms of woodland, in fact, to be honest, a lot of our woodlands are probably overstocked with ash trees because they haven't been managed very well. So we will lose ash naturally to dieback, and also by removing trees because we need to for safety. Woodlands will recover. That's not to be too sanguine about that. We have got an eye on how we would support that. But canopy loss in woodlands will be less significant than losing individual ash trees, which once they're gone, you create a gap in a park or a street or in a private garden. So I think there's different courses of attention to how we deal with that problem. So it is about replacing individual trees, supporting woodlands and managing themselves effectively. In terms of how residents understand it, so you know, if you've got a tree that's an ash tree, then ultimately you are responsible for that tree. And it's about when to get the right professional advice really and when to act. And not every ash tree needs to be felled because it's got ash climate. We don't take that stance, we don't need to in every case. There's an evolving understanding of the progression of the disease. And in recent years, some trees are starting to recover, and that's borne out by experience elsewhere, nationally and internationally. So they can, they don't always need to be felled just because they've got infections. So there's a trigger point when they do. So it's understanding when that trigger point's reached, and that is something that a private individual can probably think about. But ultimately, we need to take professional advice, and we need to act consistent to that point. So it's targeted potential.
Thanks for that. Okay, so Councillor Crawford next.
Lovely. Thank you, Chair, and thanks for bringing the report. I just kind of have some questions and comments when it comes to the street trees in particular. I'm made fairly cautious that when it comes to planting on streets, it's not the trees themselves. We can source those quite easily. It is the pits. So my question, first of all, how much does a tree pit just cost up front? How much would a new tree pit cost on an average, or ballpark figure?
So we do know that figure. It does relate to the size of the pit. So there are different sizes and different specifications. At the more value end of the scale, because you can create rather more complex pits, which do perform better, but they are more expensive, you are in the sort of £1,500 to £2,000 mark to create a tree pit. That is, and that then enables you to plant a tree. So what the tree pit does, it ensures that we can establish a tree in quite a hostile environment, which is the tarmac, either the pavement or the road. That needs to function to ensure that the road doesn't collapse into the pit, which clearly would be very undesirable. It also needs to be sufficiently robust so that we're not creating roots running into the road and disrupting that. So the pits are designed to protect the infrastructure, but they're also a receptacle for ensuring the tree can grow into it and beyond it. And that is an engineering solution of which we have a specification. Those prices have only recently been redefined, so the contract which underpins that has only recently reconfirmed those figures. So that's the current arrangement.
Great, thank you. I just leading on as well, I did read the report and it said that as utilities are frequently a big barrier with the tree pit. I was wondering, so as part of the work to provide this, did we actually speak with any of the utility companies themselves about it? Because I know that they're one city partners, or am I jumping the gun and we haven't actually taken this to them just yet?
So the first point is there is a miasma of utilities beneath our feet, and you occasionally see that when the road gets dug up and you look down and you think, good grief, there's so many pipes, how can they all work? So that is inherited, and they are everywhere. And there are rules really in respect of what reasonable distance trees should be working away from them to ensure safety of operatives digging holes and also to ensure trees don't damage the infrastructure. Those do favour the utilities rather than the tree, in truth. There probably is a national conversation, about how tolerance is acceptable to alter the green streets and green cities more than we are able to do at the moment. So we do have conversations with utility providers about specific schemes. We've had less conversations about what does it look like if we rethink this. So the strategy does include an action in there to have effectively that conversation. I think the conversation needs to bring in a national context, and there are partners to help us to do that, Forestry Commission particularly. I think there's also what we do here in Bristol, and we have kind of collaborative approaches that are already to print, and I think we can use to, in effect, come off in terms of ultimately how utility providers recognise that they've got a role to play in protecting trees, but also greening the city. And when you speak to individuals, they get that, but they are somewhat constrained by the rules of assets. So, conversation we had, but it's not as though we're not talking.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting to know. So I work in utility consultancy myself. It's
Okay.
so I was just curious because I know that in France the cost of any utility diversion is split 50-50 between the applicant and the utility company, and I've always wondered if, as you know, these one city partners, if they'd be willing to consider a framework similar to that, or you know, any such discount when it comes to these new tree pits.
Well, you pricked my ears. We don't have such a deal, actually. In truth, it's really about how close we can go.
Yeah.
When you start moving utilities, it does get awfully expensive.
Yeah.
So this is where the reality of benefit versus cost starts to become quite squeaky. In effect, I think the strategy should say that this is quite a cheap solution to significant environmental and social improvements of the city. Really is a lot cheaper than the capital works of moving bridges and moving roads and moving all that sort of stuff around. So it can be done, but when you start moving services, you run into high cost elements.
Yes, I do. There's at least one or two roads in my ward which have had some tree pits ruled out as a result of expensive utility diversion. So I do appreciate that.
Indeed, in the early part of the paper, there was a response to a particular road, Exeter Road, and there's a map which showed where the utilities are, and you can see the problem.
Yeah, hence in the public forum, 2.5 pages of information about utilities and the issues there.
Well, I gave a full answer because that's the problem, because we're not the blockers, but we are dealing with that reality. And maybe a bigger conversation, which I think you're alluding to, and I would welcome that. And the strategy does say that that's what we should do.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on. Comes to time. So the list I've got moves to Councillor Dodge.
Thanks Richard for the report. Obviously, as I said, give my thanks and just to say that in Sanctuary we've benefited from many of the schemes there. So there's been a massive amount of tree planting around Doncaster Road Park and including fruit trees, which are really appreciated. But I do want to follow up in terms of points Councillor Crawford made around. So I'm very concerned about trees around the city centre. And I obviously understand how difficult it is to find locations. And so there's a recent proposal to remove trees in the city centre, and there's a petition against that. I think it's got about 600 signatures now to try and stop that happening. It's a very long report. I may have missed it, but there's a lot of innovation around Europe around different types of tree pits. I think there's some good examples in Sweden and Stockholm in terms of how they produce more locations for trees in that. I don't know if I've missed it, but there doesn't seem to be sort of innovation around how we can keep the trees in the city centre, but also around potential innovation around providing more locations for trees, and it's going to be vitally important in the city centre. It's not only have you got the urban heat effect, obviously we've got the keeping Bristol cool policy framework that obviously predicts that the number of days above 35 degrees, it's within 30 years it's going to go right through the roof. So it's going to be more important than ever that we have trees in those high footfall areas protecting people going forward. So I just wondered if maybe there's other work going on outside of the strategy around that, or is it potentially cost? Because a lot of these innovations may need to be funded by development. And it's a Section 106 issue. I don't know if you've got a view on that at all.
Yes, I recognise what you're saying. I guess there's a distinction between what a strategy needs to say and ultimately kind of where the design elements start to come in terms of the solutions that are getting us to deal with difficult situations where you've got a very urbanised centres of cities. So the innovations you're referring to include, well, I think it's referred to as a Stockholm system, not syndrome, not something else. Whereby effectively, we as professionals, we know what trees want. They want room to grow, and they want decent soil to be in. And the Stockholm system, in some simple terms, is a connected tree pit. Many tree pits connected, and that's the desired, and that can act as very effective sustainable urban drainage. And you're familiar with some of that in Southwood, actually, which has been introduced. And there are examples of these across the city where effectively you get these co-design, co-benefit solutions which drains water, provides urban cooling because of canopy, low cover, it looks a lot better. So that's design. I think that's the design ambitions of the city in terms of what it wants to achieve. They are more expensive. It's then about how cost and benefits are evaluated. So I would argue that the non-cost benefits, which should be considered as part of the scheme, should offset some of the higher costs. I don't think the strategy's got into the weeds of that. No, you argue maybe it could. There is lots of work going on. There's lots of national advice. There's the Tree Design Action Group. Produce lots of information. We've been in that as examples of good practice in Bristol. So they are connected. And those solutions should be applied. It's about how they get mainstreamed into programmes or projects. And I do see them, such examples where we have got really good schemes which are coming forward. But urban areas are difficult. And there's probably more work and research needed to be done to identify locations which are plantable as much as protect trees we've already got. And those innovations are part and parcel of that.
Thanks very much for that. Yeah, I hope we'll be able to be kept informed about that because it will help us to add to the tree canopy and tackle the impacts of climate change and so on. Councillor Tone?
Hi, so in the report you have the tree impact data, and I just wanted to know whether you use the heat hazard mapping data as well that's in the Keeping Cool report, which will obviously show you areas within the city that are most vulnerable to extreme heat, and whether the two data metrics were kind of put together, because that will also give you an indicator of where the social impact would be best benefited along with the multiple deprivation indices data that you've got.
So I think the short answer is yes. So effectively we've used the data which has already been produced by others, and you'd be familiar with it, we keep Bristol Cool, the mapping which underpins it effectively identifies risks within property and risk outside in more public realm risk. So we are more focused on public realm risk in terms of heat stress, and the criteria which has been incorporated, which is reflected in the map, is based from that data. So in fact it shows where there's greatest risk of urban heat stress from public realm outdoor space, and that then gives the opportunity, simply taking that data, to focus our attention in terms of identifying locations to plant trees or increase tree cover to achieve that benefit. So it does do that. The degree to which which trees to plant and where to plant is kind of design and programme, but the criteria is built into the tree impact criteria as a headline recognition that that is a problem, and we do have the gift of planting trees to help to solve it.
Great, thanks very much for that. Councillor King.
Thank you very much, Richard. It's really great to see yet another big tree-based strategy that you've been working on so hard for quite a few years come into fruition. And thank you for the engagement you've had over the years on that. It's really great to see it coming forward. I'm sure it must be a relief for you too. I'm particularly pleased to see what I really prefer about this one to the regional one is its focus on equity. On the approach it's taken to prioritise those areas of low canopy and that stand to benefit most from increased tree coverage, and also looking at areas of multiple disadvantage. So I think it's a great example of the council working on a just transition approach that ensures health and environmental benefits of access to nature are felt by some of our most disadvantaged residents. And I've really felt that the officers have worked hard to embed those values and principles into the strategy, so thank you very much for that. I have to pause on page 34. I have brought this up before, but it's kind of a policy on food by stealth, if I have to call it by anything. It's quite an interesting one. But it looks like we've taken a stance on our consumption of meat and meat-derived products, without, I think, talking about it properly as a council. I would agree that meat consumption is driving deforestation, but so are avocados. So are fuel crops, and the irony of our last paper isn't lost on me in that regard. It signals the direction towards meat consumption that we haven't taken before, and it's in rather an unexpected place in a tree strategy rather than in a food strategy. So I'm just quite interested as to how that's taken. Has the whole council endorsed this? And it's an interesting place for me, it's an interesting context that we're finding it within a tree strategy. I'm interested to know if we talk to some of our food partners about this and their approach and their thoughts on it. And yeah, it's just an interesting one, and I you know, when we look at dietary choice, methods of farming as well, food security, the availability and affordability, have that all been taken into account before we've made this statement? And if we're going to recommend that, if we're going to give health advice in a report, I think we have the responsibility to provide more information, a bit more context to this as well. Thanks.
Okay, so it isn't an instruction. It is an option to consider. I guess I have presented the same to the One City Environment Board, and whether they looked at it in such detail, I don't know, but they have the gift of having that. I think I did actually highlight that. And actually the conversation in the room immediately prior to my agenda item being discussed was about the power of the kind of messaging. It isn't clearly health advice, as I said, isn't it? It actually says specifically it isn't health advice. So I guess I can only offer it as being an observation ultimately about how internationally, particularly, forests do suffer from loss to various forms of agriculture, whether that's palm oil or whether that's cattle or whether it's some other form of farming like soya. So it is what it is. I guess I can't say more than that. If you feel as though it's needs to be bolstered by something else, then as it stands, it just goes upstairs.
I don't think it can be easy. I think it's quite a strong policy perspective of you to take. I don't eat meat personally. I don't have anything against it. I just would offer that perhaps we haven't fully discussed it yet, and you know, it's a public health and communities issue as well, and I would say it's a whole council issue, that particular element of it. I think it needs further conversation. I would ask, as you know, who else has sight of this across the council in terms of as the leader endorse that approach. So yeah, it's a strong statement, and we get a lot of lobbying on, you know, from people at the Plant-Based Treaty organisation on this, and I'm just questioning whether this is the right context for it, it's the right place for it, and whether that conversation needs to be broadened out a little bit so that we can take a view and a position as a council. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that. And if it's any help, I think the guidance from the Director of Public Health and the Bristol Eaton Better Awards sort of guidance is in the public forum, question 1, in the written response from officers. Councillor Kent, do you like to?
Thanks, Chair. I'll try to be quick. So just one point, which I think I'm going to do in the agenda briefing, is page 248 of the pack, 12 of the actual strategy. We have a line about developers and policy makers. It says make provision for 20% tree canopy cover within development sites. I just think it'd be really good if we could move at some point to that where we make provision of at least 20%.
Yes, you did point that out when we had agenda setting. So I've noted it. I haven't managed to, paper's running, I didn't manage to amend the printed version, but that is very good.
Right. But that would be great if we could start to move that, because obviously there's an opportunity lost once the development's built, and I think making sure we're pointing out to developers that's the minimum we would expect, especially as we wish to move to maybe a 25% tree canopy coverage of the city in future would be great. As the Council for Hengrove and Whitchurch Park Board, I'm aware that, of course, we have a lower tree canopy. I'm also aware of the irony that nearly 1,000 trees would be cut down in my ward on council land over the next 10 years, which will have a major effect upon the tree canopy. And even though that is for development purposes, so new trees will be planted, it will take years, maybe decades, for that canopy to recover. So I hope, as we go forward, we will look at opportunities where we can create new forests. And I've already identified 2 small woodland areas that could be created in my ward. But it's going to be a real struggle. Of course, that tension between fully understand the need to provide homes in the city, at the same time the need to sort of have land for food growing, for recreational purposes, but also for trees. So I think it's a good strategy. I would also point out that we have no money attached to it, which was partly why I raised the issue on the previous report about, we're putting £500,000 here into basically a very specific carbon offset. Here's an opportunity where we could be putting additional money in the future. So I just think, I hope we will stay open to that as an idea, as a committee.
Thanks for that contribution. And yes, I think given this the One City document, it has that percentage tree canopy in it. Let's see, to go beyond that in the next revision. I'm sure it's not going to be a static thing. It'll hopefully continue to be amended and improved. And I'm conscious that the Tree Forum called for sort of more ambition on the tree canopy as well. So I'm sure we will come back to this in the future. Councillor Russell.
Hi, just a random idea. I was just reading one page about encouraging landowners to plant trees, and I wondered if there was any way to encourage specifically landlords, whether that's working maybe with universities or letting agencies, as we're seeing more and more students and landlords in the city, and those specific landlords might not have much of an incentive to look after their land, their trees, because if they're not tied to Bristol, maybe not living in Bristol even. Yeah, just a suggestion.
Well, it's a good suggestion. I guess it's how I mean, the Garden Forest theme, which is a programme which is devised by the Forest Event Trust, and it is a really good one in that it effectively makes it easy for people to plant trees in their garden and offers something which is either cheap or free with some advice. And that does need a fund. In effect, if we can do that in a way which landlords feel as though is not something that they can be particularly concerned about, because ultimately we shouldn't be offering to plant trees in people's gardens if they just don't fit. So smaller fruit trees, and there are some very small fruit trees, really do suit pretty much every garden actually. So I think the messaging about what we're offering probably should produce some attention if there is some. But ultimately we should try and make the scheme, which is decently devised, open and welcome to all, and you would have then some conversations about how we might tap into some of those messaging, and indeed whether there's groups that we could be speaking to help to do that. We can't instruct landlords to accept them, I suppose, but we can give a better way to help them to say yes.
Thanks very much. I'm conscious we've got 2 more items, so and this is an item calling on us to endorse it. I'm really glad we've got this document and that it's a partnership document with our One City partners, so I think we can work with others to further some of these goals and get some of these objectives sponsored, carried out and implemented or into their own strategies, and that's one of the goals of One City, is that we all work together in the same direction. And also I think is it 4 years since I was chairing community scrutiny and we created the idea that it should be a tree strategy and came forward with a whole series of proposals.
So you did, so we are.
4.5 years. So I'm glad I got that along with all our One City partners now. So I'm going to suggest we now move to the recommendation of the report, which is that this committee endorses the Bristol Tree and Woodland Strategy and provides its commitment to take actions forward in the strategy which are subject to resources. So I move the report. I hope someone will second that, and then we can. Oh, I saw Councillor Kent first. Thanks very much. So those in favour of endorsement of this, please raise your hand. Thanks very much. That was unanimous. And thanks to all the officers and all of your work on it, Richard.
Well, I'm representing many others, of course, just legally, but